Thank you for
Yeah,
being here.
yeah, thanks for inviting me.
Of course, you are my first interview, so I'm super excited. I'm glad like you were the perfect person to start this off. I feel like your work is really excellent, but I feel like you deserve a lot more exposure. I just love your work. And so period, it's like an honor to like talk to you.
Well, we're peers. I just started before you.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you've been doing a great job.
We also have to do some dispelling of the trad chat conspiracy. So it's just really funny. So I think how this started was just sort of like a few disagreements on Twitter, shocking,
Okay.
between like someone practicing, a traditional style of astrology and someone, maybe
Oh,
like
yes.
modern.
Trad
Um,
Chad. Yes, yes, yes.
so apparently there's this belief that there's just like a community of trad chats that just go around there and rain on other people's practice.
Mhm. Yeah, I that is a reason why I'm doing this too, because I want to put a spotlight on all types of astrology, the way that different kinds of people approach it and how they experience it, which is different from, what's very popular and like, trad chads. And I want to show the variety that's out there, especially your work making talismans and stuff. That I think that is so interesting, and I want more people to like know about it, because I feel like I get to see a little glimpse of what you do on social media, and it just looks so cool and amazing.
It's very niche, but yeah, and I do want to give a shout out to Caitlin Kopic because she's sort of like everything I do is like directly inspired from
Yeah, she's
Caitlin's
like
like
the main figurehead of all of that.
of the of making Astromagic sort of like a viable path.
Totally.
She is the OG sort of like what Astromagic is now, and
Yeah.
everything I've done is directly inspired by everything she's done. She sort of has laid like the road for a lot of initiates like me to start
Mhm.
crawling through sort of a thing. Yeah.
Yeah, I hear about her work, through Austin, and I haven't had the honor of buying a Spear and Sundry product or anything, but I'm very much looking forward to that.
I also want to say I've actually took a few drops of Caitlin's Regulus
Ooh,
tincture, and
yeah.
I just consecrated this Exalted Mars ring. So
Wow.
so I've got so I was born I'm a night chart baby, so I have Mars privilege. So there's a lot of I've just got all this Mars stuff.
Love.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm also a night chart. Um, so I feel that very deeply.
The fun phenomenon of that you get the type of clients that are meant for you.
Yeah.
My clients tend to have some of the most difficult charts, like
Hmm.
constant, like most of my clients have a hard aspect between Saturn and Mars, and their
Mhm.
chart is littered with like aversions and disjunctions.
Interesting.
So there's a lot of them have sun stuff,
Mm.
which is funny because then here's me with a deflected sun telling them sun stuff. I started making materia first as devotional,
Mhm.
because the whole process of just like starting to work with the spirit, the spirit of that sphere, and then like that, it's just the entire process up to like the final like bottling and consecrating it's sort of like a love letter to that sphere. It takes a lot for something that is like of light substance to sort of like come all the way down the level of manifestation into the sublunar sphere, under the sublunar sphere. So
Mhm.
then like it's doing all this work to sort of like give that spirit a home and give it a reason why it ought to be down.
Right, right, right.
But then it sort of just naturally sort of ended up being something that I just have being able to offer to those, because I have like a specific reading, like a remediation reading, where we're looking at, okay, so what do we've got the diagnosis, so now what do we do about it? I remember when Uranus ingressed into Taurus, so it's just like, well, it's in my ninth house. It has to do with like my nature and perception of that, of the universal truth. It's like, so I'm like, well, I already feel like I'm already pretty out there. Like, how else is this going to change? I started doing Astromagic.
So we got a little taste about what you do, but I kind of want to take it back and ask you how you got into astrology in the first place, and when was that?
Try really hard not to Jupiter Virgo this. My foray into astrology, I think the first time I discovered it, it was right around the time that I had immigrated to the States from Hong Kong. And it was sort of like a big screw you to my Chinese like heritage, because I had decided that I was going to renounce like my Chinese heritage. So, and then sort of like one of the first things this is a pretty common thing. One of the first things I did was, in the Chinese, this was like 7 years old me, so like about at the cusp of like puberty, and also like sort of dealing with major depressive disorder, and then not having any kind of language to explain what was going on.
Yeah.
And then parents and just Chinese culture, for the most part, older generations, it was a time of survival, and there was not space for neurodivergence, and like it talks about that. So just like depression just didn't exist, and this also particularly true for Chinese families. Anyways, reeling the Jupiter Virgo in.
It's good context, don't worry.
So I looked up like the Western zodiac, which is now I know is a misnomer, really.
Okay.
And I was like, oh, cool. There's a centaur horseman archer thing. Like I get to be that instead of a lamb. That was like sort of the start, and then it just never stopped. And I was just I'm probably the only person that is not an atheist within my family. The youngest, like the lost one in the family dynamics. But yeah, I just followed. Things have always, so much things have like changed in my life, and astrology has probably been the only thing that has been consistent, that I have never like really left. So that's like how I discovered astrology, and it was just always kind of like some reading here and there, then just like kind of looking up what the signs mean. And then I remember one time during high school, I just overheard some people talking about this thing called birth charts.
Ooh, the first time you hear about that is the best feeling ever.
And then my ears were perked, and I was just like, birth chart? I've never heard of this. So I Googled, as one does, Googles. And then it sort of then just kind of like, it picked up speed from there.
Yeah.
I don't even remember what like website I used, but the funny thing though is that the website I did use didn't factor in time zone differences. So for the first like year, I had the wrong chart.
Oh no.
And I was just like, this is me. This is who I am, I guess. And I was just kind of like running with it. And then yeah, so that's sort of like how it started. And then I basically just I've never taken any formal training. I basically just sat there and was like, I'm gonna delineate my own chart. So then I like wrote out every single thing, and then just tried to like figure it out. And then it just kind of like, then I did that for some other people, and then just kind of practice. And when I look back on it, at first when I was kind of living through that time, it felt like it was sort of an interest. When I think back to it now, though, I think there was like the only thing that just felt like actually genuine. I have a huge pain with like this idea of like alienation, and sort of like being raised in Hong Kong, where it's just basically like capitalism on top of capitalism.
Yeah.
And is very secular. And I think also part of the secularity had to do with probably the Great Cultural Revolution, where anything religious was sort of an anathema to the sort of like the dogma of of Mao Zedong's Communist Party. So everybody within the family is just very secular. But you know, even me as a kid, when my family sort of just like kind of low-key abandoned me into a corner, they sort of just fed me, keep me alive.
Mm,
But I certainly wasn't the poster child. That was my brother. um,
mm,
and the first thing I did instinctively, and you know, so I come from a secular family. There's no one has told me anything about theology, any of that stuff. The first thing I did was I just instinctively just like started screaming at God. That was what I did as like a 6-year-old.
mhm.
Um, and you know, I was yelling at God. I was very angry at God, but at the same, when I look back at it, I was just like, that's what I felt like. That was the only entity I thought was I could speak to.
Right.
So yeah, it's like astrology sort of was this antidote to that alienation, because it was like something when I first learned about the charts, and just the fact that, you know, learning about the planets and their compositions, it's like they don't seem all that interesting. It's just like there's just a ball of like a composite of just like random stuff just
Mhm.
floating in the air, lifeless. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, but like, you know, as a little me, but then when I learned that there was like, oh, these actually are related with me, it was like it was a gateway into like, maybe my model of reality not like is not gospel. Maybe what I've been told and have been led to believe is not gospel. So it's sort of always been this like foundation for me to you know, learn how to like deal and become intimate in sort of a non-violent way with this idea of alienation. For me, I thought cusps were a thing. I was like, I'm a Scorpio Sagittarius cusp.
Mm.
Um,
Oh, cusps.
oh God. I embarrassingly have a Scorpio Sagittarius cuspy looking thing tatted on my shin, and when people ask about it now, I tell them it's an anchor to keep me grounded.
By the way, your tattoos are gorgeous.
Thank you.
And every time I see a picture of them, I'm like, who the hell did that? Because it is so beautiful.
He's a friend of mine. His name is Eric. Yeah, he's just that. It's what I really like about him is that he's got this like he's a Cap rising with a full moon between Sun Virgo in its joy and Moon Pisces in its joy. So when I came to him, I had all these random pieces, and I told him like I want to turn this into a sleeve, and then he just did sort of like that Moon and Pisces like Jupiter thing, and just sort of congealed it all into this cohesive piece. And ever since then, I've just been going back to him. Oh, and I just wanted to also say that if you do get an astro tattoo, be careful if you're doing glyphs, because
Mhm.
you are sort of imprinting that on you. Like I made the mistake of getting the glyph of Pluto in
Oof.
Paris on me, and
Yeah.
then yeah, and so it was basically just like I was basically just like telling the underworld like my body is ready.
Oh, yeah. Invoking Pluto at all times.
Yeah.
I want to know about what happened when you had the wrong birth chart and then you saw that and you were like, did you really identify with it at first?
Right. So I have of a son that is very afflicted in my chart. So I basically just ran with the chart,
Mhm.
you know, and this was like my first look into a birth chart, so I don't think I didn't really even understand it, but I just
Right,
was
right,
like, I was like, oh, I'm a Gemini rising with Moon in the first.
right.
That had no meaning in my head,
Yeah.
and this there was no wheel. It was just a list. They didn't
Oh,
even say
yeah.
there was no house positions. It was just a list. So I was like,
Right.
I just ran with it, and then you know, like I I never really had a solid identity structure, and you know, I have my chart's just basically like it's a bunch of mutable planets like all up in the air.
Yeah.
Then you have a swamp. That's my
Okay.
Scorpio stuff. So it's just a bunch of like breezy kind of chaos,
Yeah.
and then a fetid swamp down below. I was like, this is who I am,
Right.
because it was like I was sick of being trying to do what the familial expectation of who I was supposed to be.
Right.
And then so it was just like, oh, here's something that is in the heavens that is, you know, speaking to me, that is paying attention to me. I trust that because I don't trust people. I don't trust the like everything, all the institutions I've been raised upon. So I just ran with it. I was like, this is who I am. So it, like, when I found out I was wrong, it was just sort of like, you know, and maybe this is from having a domicile Saturn too, but it's just like, you know, it was just sort of like, oh, I was completely wrong about who I was. Okay, so I'm just gonna go with this now. This is who I'm supposed to be. Yeah.
Was there like a major change? Like, did your rising sign change and everything?
Yeah, so instead of Gemini rising, it became a Virgo rising.
Okay, still Mercury.
Still Mercury. So yeah, it wasn't and I, you know, and obviously if I knew what I knew now and looked at it, it would probably be completely different. But
Right.
I
But
mean,
if you didn't know like the details, it kind of just doesn't, you're just like taking it at face value because you're still trying to figure it out.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah, that
so
makes sense.
oh, I remember when then I read about Virgo rising, and then I was just like, I was just laughing. I was like, oh my God, this thing knows who I am. It's like,
Agreed. Yeah.
because and for some, and you know, like in the Chinese culture, there's no individualism is like suppressed because it's all about the collective. It's about your family, which is why in a lot of an Asian, when you Asian names, particularly like Eastern Asian names, the family name comes first. So you know, it's like my name in American is Qingyi Chao, and then in Chinese would be Zhao Qingyi, which is, you know, Chao Qingyi. So it's the family comes first, and sort of like being the, you know, the black sheep and sort of just kind of like pushed off to the side. Um, it like astrology is very empowering because it's like, oh, this is who I am. This is like this is a model of who I am that isn't based upon like whether or not I'm fulfilling the wishes of the family.
Right. How long was it before you had your real, like your actual chart?
It wasn't very long. I'd say probably
Okay.
like either 6 months to a year.
Not bad. Not bad.
Yeah.
Because I just hear stories about people that are like, oh my God, like I've had the wrong chart for like 5 years or something. And you get
Yeah.
so attached to what it is. And so at least, you know, it wasn't like super long for you.
And
Yeah.
then I found out recently that actually the time was a little bit off. So it didn't all the biggest change was that it shifted all of my angles to the anorectic degrees, and then so then everything ended up falling on all of my angles except for the descendant falls under the bounds of Saturn. And I was like, when I figured out, I was like, my God, yes, this makes so much more sense now.
That's so cool. Like how you can go from not having a sense of your identity to like when you finally get the right birth chart, you're like, wow, that really is me. It's speaking to who you are, even if you didn't like consciously know it. Like once you see it, you're like, that is totally me, you know?
Yeah, it's like the other one before was like, yeah, it's a good fit, but then the correct one now was like, oh, this slaps.
I feel so bad for people that go so long with the wrong, you know, time, and it happens all the time. So it's
It
just a
happens.
weird phenomenon to experience, you know?
And I do think it's sort of like a nice Saturn practice, which is just that, like, you know, that's Saturn's realm, which is everything you thought was real, everything you thought to be true is actually all wrong.
Oh, yeah.
Good Saturn practice of, okay, so what do you do now?
I want to ask you about your Twitter handle. Is it in Latin?
I I believe so. I believe so. Yes. It's just Page of Cups.
Oh, cool.
And the only reason why I picked it because there's this person who picked Page of Cups. They have not used their account, and
Oh,
I die a little every time I look at that account. Like, I just want to sit there and message. It's like, hey, can you kindly just deactivate your account?
have you messaged them?
No, but I go every so often. I look at up like, are they doing anything? I'm just like, these mother, yeah.
Maybe you should message them and be like, hey, I noticed you're not really using it. Like, do you mind? I don't know if you would pay them or something, but you know.
Yeah. So then the next best thing was I was just like, oh, you know, like, you know what, I'll just do it in another language. So the Page of Cups, it sort of from sort of like from Austin's course on tarot and astro, like it's sort of like you lay out your chart through the trumps, and then you sort of just like add up the different elements, and then you see like what you end up with. And the pages are associated with earth, and then the cups water. So there was originally it actually ended up being more of like my chart actually adds up more to like a knight of cups. But my close, because knights are related with air, knight of cups they're the air of water. But my close friends, we talk about I talk about my close friends, and they all think that I'm much more of a page of cups kind of a person. Yeah, I mean it's a really fun practice, and it's just an interesting different like lens to look at your chart. So you just like you would just look at you would your Cap rising, right?
What am I? I'm a Leo rising.
Leo rising. I don't know why I thought you're Cap rising. I know you
I'm a
have
Cap
Cap.
sun.
Okay, so
My chart ruler, yeah, is in Cap. Yeah.
so then the first card you put down would be Sun. Wait, Leo rising? No, you'd put Strength.
Uh-huh.
And then you would look at your first house, as that card Strength, and then you would just kind of go from there. And
It goes
then
in order around.
yeah, you're just laying out your chart with the
Cool.
trumps.
It gives a different context to your chart. I'm going to dwell on that for a while because that is probably going to give me a lot more insight to what I already know about myself. I'm still like in seeker mode, I'm still trying to figure out who I am. I'm post Saturn return, but I feel like starting from the bottom again, building back up. So I'm just like, oh, like, who am I? I kind of know, but I'm still not like 100. And I'm still trying to find like all the deeper meaning in things for myself.
And I'm really excited for you when Saturn ingresses into Pisces, because from what I've heard from other Saturn return survivors, that it's typically in the waxing sextile of the phase that the wisdom and the silver linings are manifest there. It's sort of like an understanding of like what just happened during the 3 years.
Oh, I can't wait.
Yeah.
Because I mean, even though technically it's done, it's really not, because it's still in Aquarius. So it's just, it's still like connected to, Capricorn house because it's ruling that house. So yeah, it's been quite a ride. But I'm here, I'm alive. So yeah, I think it's really funny when younger astrologers are like, it's not that bad. Don't worry, don't be scared. And I'm like, it depends. Like, maybe sometimes people need a little bit of a warning. Because when mine started, I didn't really know like the depths of what it meant, but I was prepared like a little bit. I got into astrology right as it was beginning. So I kind of knew like, okay, this is going to be hard, but like, I didn't know the extent. So now I do. So it is hard for night charts, especially.
Yeah, because I mean, there's because it's like Saturn's like, if we think of like one of like the esoteric connections of Saturn is like Saturn is Malkuth, so Saturn is like the kingdom. That's the bottom. That's the bottom of the tree of life. So it's like Saturn is like the manifest world. So it's like So it's like, while I don't agree that you have to like go through your Saturn return in order to be a practicing astrologer, I will say though that until you've been through it, you just like really don't know.
Right. Reality is not like really apparent to you until
it's one thing to just conceptualize your Saturn return by looking at your chart and your natal promise, and it's a whole nother thing when it becomes your world.
It's a crazy phenomenon that I feel like more people, if they knew about it, they would have a lot more peace just knowing that like, oh, there's meaning to this, this is not for no reason, and I'm not crazy that I'm going through such a hard time, like, oh, this explains it.
And also, I think it just like provides a context, and which is now one of my favorite things about astrology is that you know, it really, astrology is like is the language of the spheres, which is a language of like time and cycles.
Mhm.
So that means that, you know, it's on a cycle that it will change, but then it's all part of the unfolding.
Yeah.
And then what that's like led me to believe is that, you know, then that means everything is holy, everything is divine, and everything, it there is nothing that does not have sanctity. Even in the most like, even in the depths of sin and depravity, somehow it is still somehow holy and still has its place within the unfolding of everything.
Yes. I know you and I are both certified in yoga, and I read all the sutras last year, and it was totally supported in that. In they work together so well. I don't know. It fits so well in like a philosophy of like, okay, even if this is awful, I'm gonna find what makes this meaningful to me and how this enriches me, and how I can work through this in a way that is not as destructive as, you know, just chaos and anarchy, being centered throughout, and you know, seeing through it as opposed to freaking out.
One way I've heard yoga defined is yoga is skillfulness in action.
Mm,
And so it's like, how does one move through catastrophe with skill?
right.
And you know, speaking of like yoga, as I've like learned more about sort of like the history and the cultural context, it's just yoga is Saturnian as heck.
Yeah.
Like it's so Saturnine. It wasn't until it's only a
Mhm.
very modern. It's only within very recent times that it sort of dawned on this much more like Venusian Jupiterian sort
Yeah.
of
Martian even.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, the text that sort of codified like, you know, hatha yoga, like, and sort of turning it into this more like physical force, and then
Yeah.
that sort of using that to disseminate into like the states and around the world. Um,
Yeah, it's a
but
lot more than just like exercise and showing off like what you can do. You know,
yeah,
it's how you move through life and apply those concepts to every day, every moment.
mhm. Yeah. But what I found really funny though is that the original yogis were just like kind of like comically pedestrian.
Hmm.
Like the ancient yogis were just trying to escape judgment day. They're trying to escape reincarnation. So like you had some, like, you know, when the Brits quote discovered the
Ugh,
first yogis,
yeah.
the first thing they noticed is that they were just sitting there holding what we now know as vrikshasana, tree pose, for like more than like 2 hours a day, and that was their penance. You just straight up had some yogis, some Brahmins that were just like, you know what, I'm going to just sit in a cave and just like I'm going to like take in as I'm going to renounce the physical world so much because it's all illusion, it's all Maya, it's all samsara, it's a
Mhm.
wheel of suffering, and I'm going to, this is my penance so that I can escape reincarnation. And I remember hearing the advice about like, you know, as an astrologer, one of the best things that we can do is to continue to expand our sort of like our knowledge base and not just like wholly do astrology, because astrology is a system of intellectualizing our beingness, our
Right.
experience. So it only gets better when we have a better understanding.
Yes.
You know, one of my favorite sort of transposing one of my favorite sort of yogic concepts is the concept of drishti,
Hmm.
and and that's basically like what the sun is. The sun is sort of like the chart's drishti. It's where the gaze is fixated and sort of like where everything ends up falling towards.
I would love to get a 500-hour certification in
Yeah,
the
same.
future, so I can not only freshen up, but make a deeper, you know, understanding, and have that enrich my astrology understanding. Because like you said, you if you just do astrology and you don't like go out and experience the world, you're not going to have a well-rounded like depth of knowledge and how to put together, because astrology is kind of like the math. If you don't go out and have experiences, then you're just you know, doing formulas all day long, and it's like you can do the formula, but what does it mean? You know what I mean? Like theorems and all this stuff. I don't know if that makes sense, but
Yeah, no, it's the same reason why I hated math, and I'm sure a lot of people hated math in primary education. There's no context.
you're like, why?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Astrology without the context is just, like you said, it's just a bunch of equations.
Mhm.
It's just numbers.
We've already said that you are certified in yoga. Is that what you do for a living?
So yes, I actually teach at a corporate-ish setting, just
Mhm.
because I have some opinions about the current yoga industry, which is really more symptomatic of like the spiritual the spiritual culture, the new age culture itself. I do the I teach classes, and then I also, you know, I'm a practicing astrologer, so it's like I take on clients, and then after that, I'm slinging coffee in between.
Oh my gosh, we're so similar.
Yeah,
So do I.
yeah,
Wow.
uh,
Yeah. So
mhm.
you kind of just like, you know, kind of do all three. And that's cool that you have such a strong, well, you get, you know, some clientele from your yoga classes, which is perfect. And then you can have like that steady paycheck with coffee.
I've been trying to be very figure out how to like bring astrology in a little bit, but then yeah, but at the current point, I'm trying to really focus on sort of like giving my students, you know, and I have a small following because I teach at a corporate gym,
Mhm.
so and it's like, so it's like lawyers, attorneys, city hall workers, but it's like it's sort of like giving sort of the cultural context and the philosophical context of why we're doing yoga.
Right.
And I get to do that because every other teacher is just you know, just doing a sort of like a vinyasa yoga type of a, you know, class.
Yeah. I have been experimenting with how to integrate, you know, astrology and yoga. And it definitely takes a very delicate touch and a very deep understanding. So that's why I sort of backed off from that for a while, because I know I have a lot more to learn. The more you practice it and think about it, I think the more it develops. So yeah, it's a very interesting journey to be on, to have both you know, viewpoints and figure out how to put them together.
Yeah, and for me, the biggest hurdle was actually kind of this over fixation on trying to like in some kind of way like congeal my astrology practice with my yoga practice, but only yoga through like asana, so the
Mhm.
physical portion. But as once I started practicing planetary remediation at the start, then which then just
Yeah.
turned into theurgy.
Mhm.
It's actually the everything yoga, like the different limbs of yoga, it's sort of like it sets you up to do this sort of theurgical work, you
Yeah.
know, like because it's like it's giving you the guidelines of how to, you know, hone one's focus towards a divine object.
Yeah.
And then, you know, and then that's, and once I started doing that, because, and that's what during the pandemic was around the time I fell out of yoga. I was very disillusioned.
Yeah.
um but then that's when I started learning practicing planetary remediation, and as I got deeper and deeper, then suddenly I realized like, oh, like the system of yoga is so that I can do theurgy better. What I've actually learned from uh, actively working with the spheres, like very deliberately working with them, is, and this comes from sort of an emanationist point of view, which is that, you know, you had Nus, like sort of like this supreme consciousness. It is life. It is energy. It's like vibration. It's movement. It simply is, and that's what it does. It makes things be. So it just keeps spinning out more and more things. So within this cosmology, every single thing is an emanation of something else. It's like, it's kind of like what Plato's like theory of forms, that there's ultimately like a divine version of that thing, and that's why it exists.
Mhm.
So once I started to frame, because you know, I have we've got like earth placements, so it's like, you know, oh, what is a problem, how do I fix it? But what I've actually found out that once you start doing this work, it's not so much about fixing it. It's more of like, once you become intimate with a sphere and you learn what that sphere is about, it then gives you this new foundation to approach your own. And then from there, you get to learn why your sphere is exactly the way it is. Like, for
That makes
example,
sense.
when I was doing heavy Mercury work, I thought that I had to do Mercury proper. I have Mercury in antithesis in Sagittarius, and it's
Same.
yeah, Merc Sag brain.
Mhm.
So I thought that I was supposed to, not do Merc Sag, and and then part of it is like practicing doing Merc proper, quote quote quote, but then and then I realized halfway through all of a sudden that like I'm not actually doing Mercury how I'm supposed to do Mercury.
Right.
And then
Yes.
once I learned what proper Mercury it was, I learned exactly why that's not for me.
Right. And you will always feel like you're failing when you try to be something that you're not. How do you embrace what you actually are? And how do you make peace with that? And how do you work with it?
Mhm. Yeah, like I used to spend an unhealthy amount of time prepping for charts for readings
Oh,
for clients.
mhm.
I used to go up to like 6 hours, and then
Guilty.
yeah, and then when I would show up to the reading, I would be completely flustered, and
Mm,
then I wouldn't be able to like be there. And while not every astrologer agrees that this is a way to read, in the hold space, I have an angular moon. I can't just holding space, doing the moon things, what I do. So once I actually became intimate with the sphere of Mercury, then it was like I I started to do Mercury in the Jupiter way, which is
right.
that it's sort of like this. It's a much more intuitive kind of like entire bodily type of a process. It's sort of like gut bone intelligence. So I started to just look at the chart and prep just an hour, write a few notes, a few days before, and then after that I would just forget about it, leave it, then show up to the reading for my client, and then all of a sudden just stuff would just kind of just pop up out of
Yeah.
nowhere, and then it was so organic, and that's the way I prep now, and I have never gone back. And my ability to delineate clients charts and then hold space for them to process has just like has just fundamentally changed as a result. And that was not from trying to make the weakness of my Mercury better, but it was more of like becoming intimate with exactly what my Mercury does. Now
Yeah.
that being said, I do lose something every single day. I read things and will straight read them wrong. I will like logistical stuff. Like I'll look at keys on my desk and be like, I need to grab these keys. I need to grab these keys. And I'll think about it so hard that I imagine myself doing it. Then I think I have done it. And then halfway through the day, I look back and I was like, oh man, I didn't do it.
Yeah.
So it's like, it kind of like at this point, it's like, okay, how do I live with this? This is
Yeah.
just, yeah.
I can totally relate to that, the reading thing too. Like the times when I couldn't prepare really like as much as I wanted to, those were the best readings because it was just organic, like you said. And um yeah, I think that's really important for people to know that, not try to change yourself, but learn who you are and work with it.
You do have the you have an Antisha connection between the Sun and Mercury as well. And then what I love about sort of like Mercury, like the Mercury Sag and like the Leo ascendant is like, when I think of Mercury Leo, I think about like sort of like it's the solar principle. So it's like, how do you explain something in the most essential, basic way in the fewest words possible?
Yeah.
And then the Merc Sag is then just like, okay, so and now how do we proliferate that? How do we spread that? Like make it a viral thing.
Yeah, I think it's less about explaining things in a detail-oriented way and explaining it using like sort of like visuals or sort of like examples,
Mhm.
so that other people can understand on a more wide scale, like because they get the example better, as opposed to you just like going into detail about explaining it that way, if that makes sense. So like giving a
Yeah.
visual or giving an example is more effective for us,
Yeah.
than
Yeah, it's like it's the whole saying, a picture is worth 1,000 words.
right.
It's
Yeah.
just faster. My favorite types of people are people with a Mercury and a Jupiter sign, because it's just like,
Oh yes.
we'll start a topic of conversation, and then the entire conversation is us trying to answer that question, but then we never actually get there.
Just kind of like philosophizing and trying to get to the deep meaning of things.
Yeah, what's the universal truth here?
Yes.
Yeah.
You are sort of like in between a few things. Do you ever plan to do astrology like full time, or have it support you, or are you just kind of taking it casual for now?
I mean, that's my dream,
Yeah.
to be a full-time astrologer. So I'm working towards that.
So you do a lot of different types of astrology. Where do you land personally on like house systems, and do you lean heavily on either like Western or Eastern, or like a combination? Um, what's like your style, I guess?
I want to sort of give a quote imperfectly Rob Bailey, who's a wonderful astrologer. He focuses on horary and medieval techniques, but
Love Rob.
Rob basically just says that we're all modern astrologers in some sense,
Right.
because if we're using outer planets, for example, we're modern astrologers.
Yes.
So I mean, like, my astrology style is sort of like, in perfect Jupiter fashion, it's like a soup. So the main bits of it is, I use whole sign houses, but each house system, I use different house systems for different things. So I'll use quadrant houses when I'm looking at elections, or looking for elections for magical workings. I do use I do the mutable madness thing, where I'll look at both the quadrant house and the whole sign, the quadrant houses, and with the whole signs. But when I do that, the quadrant house is rooted in the whole sign significations. So when I use quadrant houses with whole signs, I'm using it to gauge a planet's angularity, for
Mm.
example. So it's like, even though if a planet's in the first whole sign, if it's decline is falling from the angle into the 12th, that tells me that objectively this person has this planet in the first house, yet subjectively they feel they feel it in a different way.
Mhm.
um, and I learned this from Hugh when we were talking about like house systems, because it's like the whole sign house is like looking at the ecliptic, whereas the quadrant houses is dividing the sky into circles. So it's like you have one that's sort of like bird's eye view, then you have one that's sort of like a street view.
Mhm.
And so like so I use those. I do, and then primarily, like, most of my astrology is rooted in sort of like Hellenistic astrology, and bits and pieces of like medieval. Um, I do. I try not to conflate between sort of like the quote West and quote East. So like, tropical and tropical, no, not tropical, like, yeah, the West and Eastern, so Vedic and Western. But I do use the Vedic's con, sort of like a rationale for the nodes,
Yeah.
because I find the sort of like the uh, I don't like calling it Western. I've been calling myself a Hermetic astrologer.
Hmm.
So sort of like that's sort of like kind of like the that is sort of the cosmology, the philosophy around sort of a lot of those ancient systems. So like I've been implementing sort of like the Vedic rationale of the nodes into like my Hermetic astrology, which it's like the Rahu, or Caput Draconis, is not just increase, and then Cauda Draconis, Ketu, is not just decrease. Like they're eclipse points. They're
Yeah.
messy.
Mhm.
So that's the one conflation I do make. And then, but yeah, so it's like primarily though, it's like I'm really focused on the 7 traditional planets. And then I here and there I do look at the outers, but I kind of look at them as outer planets. They're almost like just sort of like fixed transit points
Mm-hmm.
within the nativity. Uh, and then I only use the main five aspects, so the
Mm-hmm.
Ptolemic aspects, but I use the Antisha doctrine like heavily, just because I have so many clients with aversions all over their chart. And then one of the sort of pioneering astrologer who's done pioneering work on the Antishas is Kate Fleckinger, of ambient astrology, and she has put out a really amazing lecture where she actually justifies the power of Antishas by using the thema mundi and showing how the Antisha schema actually helps complete the exaltation
Ooh,
wheel, yeah, of the
I need
thema
to look
mundi.
into that. So yeah, you're like an amalgamation of many things,
Yeah,
and so am I. You and I again, very similar.
Merc Sag, just everything in the kitchen sink. Oh, and then also throw in fixed stars.
Oh yeah, I mean, yeah.
Um,
If they're there, why would you ignore it, you know?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. You seem to be very open about your interest. Is there any part of your life where you sort of don't talk about it with certain types of people, or you're more private about it?
I'm pretty open. Like I'm not sitting there like trying to shout it at every single corner, but
Mhm.
I'm a little bit more I'm still open, like, it's very much like I've just been, being the kid who was just like ignored, and
Yeah.
there was always a fear of being invisible. So like I've sort of like everything that I do now is sort of like my personal brand sort of a thing. So it's like astrology is very much me. That being said, though, like I don't go around like I won't instigate the conversations,
Mhm.
but I'll sit there and just like listen and everything, and then should I feel the moment is right to like sort of interject something, then I typically will. Yeah,
Yeah.
but yeah, but I mean, my brand is TMI.
Relatable.
It's
A big
Merc,
mouth.
yeah, Merc Sag. It's just like I just everything
Oversharing. Yeah.
oversharing. And
Totally.
yeah, and then and then I got that freaking Jupiter and Virgo in the first. So then one of
Oh
the
yeah, that only makes it easier to
yeah,
just like go overboard. Oh,
yeah.
so funny. So as far as like, a dating life or whatever, do you feel like any partners that you have would have to share your interest in some way, or would you like, how does that affect that part of your life?
Yeah, I would really love to have a partner that is, as steeped in an astrological practice as me, but that's sort of a tall order. So what
Right.
I'm looking for is more of just someone who is interested in sort of the sort of understanding and becoming intimate with the sort of like the nature of reality and their being,
Mhm.
and they have an impulse to chase down any information or any experience related. That's sort of what I need. um yeah, and then also just like yeah, I guess that's like sort of what I need. But there definitely needs to be, if we're going to be dating, they're going to be hearing astrology.
Right. It's like, yeah.
It's like if you don't like that, then this is not going to work.
Yeah, it's not a match. Yeah, because I just know there's some people that are like, like I do this in, for work or whatever, and I just want someone who can get my mind off of it.
I prefer like not even just an openness, but like just a genuine interest in like learning. And
Yeah.
that's not an expectation of like, oh, they're gonna sit down and just basically uh binge on the astrology podcast.
A lover of knowledge.
Yeah, yeah.
Mm.
And plus, I mean, like they've got. I feel like since I'm so just upfront about everything, that or immediately acts as a filter, because I mean, my entire apartment is just basically like altar after altar.
Yeah.
Like there's a Mars altar in the center of my apartment, and then in the eastern part of the room is a Jupiter altar.
So, have you ever experienced a negative impact of astrology in your life? Has it, like, because we talk about how great it is, but has there ever been a period where you felt that it wasn't so great?
Oh yeah, definitely, 100%. So I have a tendency to catastrophize.
Oh, yes.
So, and often when I try to do the Saturn thing, I often do it too much in the worst way possible.
Hmm.
So it's very easy for me to doom scroll.
Mm.
Um, and then also I sort of, and then just like whatever my interpretation of my natal promise is just sort of like that's what's going to happen.
Hmm.
But there's very much a chance that I could be misinterpreting my chart. Astrology is sort of like the structure in which I experience my reality now.
Right.
So
It's hard to
that,
unsee.
yeah, so it takes away a little bit of sort of just the ability to just be present and just experience. Like,
Mm.
I mean, when like when things happen, like I'll get when I get like lacerated by seemingly docile household objects, then first thing I do, most people it's like, oh, they put some pressure on the cut, stop the bleeding. I pull out a chart. I'm like, what's happening in this case? Astrology should be a language of intellectualizing reality, but it should not replace reality. Like
Yeah.
I haven't gone down this road yet, but I could elect I could cast charts and elect times to do almost everything. I could get back to the point where I'm just like, when should I go have dinner tonight? Like let me go like pull up the chart. When I'm setting up appointments and they're like, what's your availability? I'm like, oh, let me check my schedule. I'm not checking my schedule. I have AstroGold open and I'm looking through the chart.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
Mhm. It's hard to not overdo it. And it's hard to just step back and be like, okay, I'm just gonna let it do its thing and without me interfering.
Yeah.
Have you noticed like your practice maturing over time as far as like a development of this is kind of how I fell into more things? Because it just kind of comes with learning.
What I was trying to do before, I'm just much more competent at doing now.
Mhm.
What I was trying to do before, I didn't have the proper language to sort of articulate what I was actually trying to do, whereas
Mhm.
I do now. I guess it's sort of like once I finally got affirmed in a diagnosis for my neurodivergence,
Mm.
then it's sort of then it allowed me to sort of perceive like my astrology practice in sort of like its authentic way, and then realizing what it has done, why I have been doing it, and then
Mm.
once I understood that, then it was sort of like it made it more competent and made it more effective.
Self-discovery helping.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, and then I mean also just when I moved away from sort of like a modern psychological perspective and moved into more of a circumstantial perspective, it introduced sort of like these like philosophical ideas, and then it sort of like really starting to tease out what exactly my cosmology was, because our beliefs, our cosmology informs our practice, and
Yeah.
when I was doing it before, it was sort of like it was just this formless type of thing, whereas it's like now it's not a formless type of thing. It's like a very like specific. Like first things I say to my clients is like when you get well, I want you to know that your astrologers like beliefs, their cosmology, their cultural context is going to inform the type of astrologer they are. So you're going to get a different reading. Now, like here's what mine is,
Right, right,
it's like
right.
yeah, and I
Not
tell
saying
them
that you are the only correct interpretation out there. It's just like, this is from my point of view, this is what it
yeah,
looks like to me. I
yeah,
like
yeah,
that.
and then I just tell them like I'm going to tell you right off the bat like I'm pretty deterministic.
Any other influential astrologers?
Yeah, easily 100% Austin Coppock. Austin is probably the most influential. I'm consistently citing him, but also two of my closest friends and colleagues, Hugh Tran and Jessica Tiemann. She's the Malefic Queen. She just put out two incredible talks, sort of like really teasing out Mars and Saturn, and they're like has absolutely like and fundamentally changed my relationship with them. They're both incredibly influential to the way I practice now and continue to be.
Do you remember who gave you your first reading?
Like a paid reading?
Yeah. Or I guess like informal or formal.
The first official reading I ever got was actually basically well into my foray into Hellenistic astrology. It was from Palace.
Oh, lovely.
And it's pretty hilarious because even after staring at my chart for more than a decade, they pointed out that I had a partile Venus-Neptune square, which just I never even paid attention to. Partile means like it's a perfected aspect.
How did that sort of change your perspective of yourself when you learned that, or validate?
You know, like what the whole thing of like when you should do something because you know better, but you don't.
Yeah.
It's like it's basically just like, oh, good Lord, here we go. This is Venus-Neptune square happening, and then it happens, and the back of my head like this is Venus-Neptune square like shenanigans right now. It's really one of my favorite things because it's like not only is it like I get to learn something a little bit more about myself, my own practice, but it's like well actually that's like one of the most beneficial, but it's also just like getting a different perspective because it's like I know that I have an afflicted sun, so it's like I know my perception of is strongly biased towards pessimism and catastrophizing. So it's like I need other people's input.
Being a part of the astrology community, where do you see yourself fitting in? Whether that's online or in just the world.
One thing I do really want to do is sort of be sort of a contradiction to this idea of like trad chads. Which is sort of like some of the work I'm doing now. It's like you know, I actually really enjoy like kind of taking a time like kind of teasing out some of these like foundational things, and apparently like I apparently have patience for it. Like doesn't seem to bother me when you know, it's like I get redundant questions or like just kind of really sitting there like teasing things out for people. So I mean there's that capacity, and then also like there's also then within the niche community, there's the even more niche community of the Astromages.
Yeah.
So like I'm also in that thing. I don't really know where I fit in there. I don't really even call myself an Astromage because as far as I'm concerned, I'm just an initiate. So I'm not sure where I'm gonna fit into that context. I do know that I want to sort of take part in sort of what Caitlin is trying to build if she is trying to build something, sort of like, you know, just like a community and kind of spreading out like Astromagic and making it you know, more accessible and having more people just explore, you know, magic, which to me magic is a funny term because magic implies that it's something that is not is, you know, it's out of order, it's out of context. It's a miracle. It's a miracle. It's like it's the stuff of science fiction or something. It's sort of like an aspect of reality. And to me, practicing magic is just having a very deliberate spirit, being very deliberate about one's spiritual engagement.
Deliberateness. I like that.
Yeah.
So I think it's going to be cool to see that kind of get more life that into that community, and the way astrology is spreading right now in social media is mind-blowing, like especially on TikTok and stuff like that. I'm just bracing myself for people to start doing that with Astromagic. So that's going to be very interesting to see.
Yeah, and I mean, like, it's wild to see the mainstream kind of like talking about Saturn returns.
I know.
Kind of on a broader scheme, I think for those of us who have much love and reverence for this, like this very ancient tradition, this ancient practice, is that, you know, we're sort of like the custodians, and we sort of, so it's like sort of being a part of that work of just making sure that the astrology that is, you know, that at least we're putting out, and as much as is within our sphere of influence, is that we're making sure that it is, it's ethical and it's rigorous, and that it's like it honors the roots, it's like roots and its lineage, while also still being a living tradition, so that it continually changes and continually grows.
Yeah, instead of like bastardizing it and just doing like the telephone game of what things mean, and then they just turn into something else that they're not. Just really going back to the source, and where did we get this information, and who said this, you know what I mean, like who in the past actually wrote this down.
And there's like no, I don't think there's like anything wrong with pop astrology. I mean, it's just like there's always going to be like there's always going to be something of that of every single thing.
Right.
But what I see the role of astrology is sort of, it's, I find it to be such an incredible tool we can use to sort of combat this I don't know what's like the right word. Sort of like this, the culture of like the new age spirituality. It's that, and there's this idea of like there's no discernment, there's no nuance,
Mm-hmm.
and then it's like, and a lot of folks coming to astrology think that's how astrology is. And I'm like, well, that can play a role. It's like, but if you're doing proper astrology, astrology is the driest, most rigorous of the divine sciences. It's continuing to gain more traction, and more people are becoming interested in it. And I think it can be something very useful that, like, you know, it to combat sort of this this thing that this mentality that I just find it's just so problematic, and it's just sort of like the latest manifestation of all sorts of other long standing issues within the world.
Yeah, I mean, that leads into how you continue to have a healthy sense of skepticism for what we develop in the modern times.
By, it's really simple, by just accepting that I could be wrong, I can be wrong,
Mhm.
allowing myself to be wrong, um, knowing that there's a difference between being wrong and then identifying myself as being wrong.
Mm.
And just, and this is something I've noticed that so many folks, it's really, I don't even think it's about being incorrect. It's sort of, it's more of like it becomes part of the identity, like the identity gets challenged, so then suddenly it's an assault on their very like
Mm.
nature.
Mhm.
So, and I think that is what ultimately prevents one from being in a space of learning. Try to very diligently remain in a teachable space,
Right, right.
that, and be, and also learning how I can be wrong, and allowing myself to be wrong, because I will be wrong.
Mhm.
But then also, though, I think with a skepticism, I think it also takes courage to believe in something and run with something. It takes courage to indulge the possibility of being incorrect and being wrong.
People identify so much with, I know this really cool thing, and then they get horrified when they're called out for being wrong, and then they think their life is ending, or, you know, like it's going to hurt my brand.
And you know, it's like, we're, astrology is really heady. There's like some of the smartest people I've ever had the pleasure to listen to and to like experience are here. We all could do practice in separating the difference between, like, you know, being wrong is not a measure of the quality of one's character.
Right.
It's like, it's more about what do we do with being brought awareness to the fact that we are incorrect, or we have our facts wrong.
Yeah, there's this type of humbleness that is helpful to, you know, like remaining teachable, and knowing that you will never know everything, and it's a continuous journey of learning and knowledge. And so when you realize that, and it's very freeing. It's like, okay, well, I have so much to learn, and I don't have to like be right all the time. I can kind of just relax into it and just honestly, earnestly say what I know, and um, keep learning.
And just like, and being like pliable.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's like, it's sort of like what the whole like thing about like entering a yoga class as a beginner, even if one has like decades of practice.
Skeptics, how do you tend to deal with them? Like whether it be face to face or just in your personal life or like online. Um, what's your
I
approach usually?
With skeptics, I think that there's a better person equipped to deal with skeptics. Like I will sit there and just like refute them,
Mhm.
but most of the time skeptics have no idea what astrology is. Like
Yeah,
it's like they'll always start with precession, and I'll just like laugh and just like roll my eyes.
of course.
But yeah, I don't focus on skeptics. I mean, because I'm already enough of a skeptic. I already have enough crises of faith as it is. Like I got my fill already. So
You're past that.
yeah, I like, I could care less if you know, and I know some folks like disagree with this, but it's like I could care less if you believe in astrology.
Mhm.
Like that, I have better things to do with my time than to sit
Yeah,
here than to sit here and try to convince someone who
right.
is committed to disagree with me.
I tend to add to that by saying that there's a place for skeptics, and it's probably in your birth chart for you to be a skeptic. So I'm not going to try to change you. Like you're there for a reason, and it's not for everybody.
Yeah,
It's not everybody's supposed to go on this journey. So I'm just
yeah,
let it be.
and there's definitely I'm too merc saggy, and like I'm not the most rational person. So I'm like, there's better people for
Yeah,
this.
I try to pass that along to better people that
A
can do it better
little,
than I
a
can,
little, not even better, but just people who articulate in a more sort of
Yeah,
cerebral, intellectual kind of a way.
they're strong, like the strength of being able to do that, and the patience.
Yeah. So that's like definitely my time could be better spent elsewhere.
I know you mentioned that a little bit about religion. I think it's sometimes surprising to hear that astrologers can be religious and that they're not mutually exclusive.
I too tell people that I'm religious, and they're often pretty shocked.
Mhm.
But then I qualify that by saying that I think there needs to be an understanding of the difference between religion, as if we sort of like use the root word in Latin religio, which means to bind, as so it's like then religion is sort of like a structure that houses spiritual ideals and principles. But then we also have religion as a political structure,
Mm,
and those are two very different things.
mm.
Like because all there's so like, and I do my best to sort of like dispel that, because no, everybody wants a straw man, everybody wants a scapegoat, and and really the political structure of religion has certainly done a great job of becoming that. But I mean, like, there's a reason why it's an ideal within the states of like with the separation of church and state, because the church used to be a political power.
Mhm.
um, and the common denominator is that it's not religion that's messed up, it's people. People are the ones who, like, and every religion has people doing terrible things in the name of that religion. So, for example, we have Buddhists in Myanmar committing genocide.
Mhm.
You know, just like it's just it. We have Hindus, Brahmins murdering Muslims. It's like
Yeah.
it's the common denominator is people.
Don't throw the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, exactly. So a spiritual connection uh, is sort of like what kind of becomes the thing that religion houses, and religion then just becomes an interface to access those spiritual principles. And that's what I believe. And there's power within that interface. So that's why, yeah, it's like, yeah, I am a religious person. I'm studying magic under Josephine McCarthy's course, Quaria, and she does just a fantastic job of laying out this worldview in a very sort of practical, no frills kind of a way. But like even the way that churches are arranged in sort of like with a magic sensibility. Religion is just sort of like dressing. That is on top of sort of like this deeper patterning. And once there's an understanding of this, then it became, for me at least, it became a perspective shift that, oh, religion is an interface with that particular power that's been patterned in through like repetitive, like, practice and repetitive use.
I agree with you. I used to be very like anti, but actually astrology has brought me closer to God in a way. And I, believe more in prayer, and I believe more in, the validity of religion. And like you said, it's the people that give it a bad name or make it seem like it doesn't make sense.
It's people that commit atrocities in the name of those principles.
Right.
But the thing is though that we have a very sort of like specific morality being people that's very tied to like our mortality. And then one of the wonderful things about astrology and also this like magical perspective is that we're not the center of everything. We are little ants. And that and even our morality is a very specific perception. So like, because like for example, the Bhagavad Gita is a story about cousins killing each other.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like and that's sort of one of the things is that like while it seems horrible and egregious from our perspective, like and it is, but also there is a greater context, so that it's not just, it's like it has a purpose. If astrology is sort of a language to understand reality, then we have a language for things that are supportive, benefics, and we have a language for things that are destructive, malefics. Like that's just part of the life is that if there is good, there must be if there's the beautiful, there must be the ugly. And I think really what at least how I perceive it is that for a lot of folks, their theology is rooted in whether or not they're comfortable with it. Like their spirituality depends on whether or not it gives them comfort. And as soon as that comfort is challenged, then it's like it suddenly loses its value. The process of faith is not absent of discomfort. Like, it's that's part of the process. The common question of like good and evil, if God is real, why does God let bad things happen? But it's like, but why does the validity of God rest upon your comfort with it?
So anyway, I will catch you on the internet and just, keep in touch. I really appreciate your time. And thanks for being here and doing this with me.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was a lot of fun.
Yay.
See you later.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.